After a long wait, Brian Walshe's trial is finally underway. He was deemed competent. We had a little break because of that. He got sent to the hospital, and we had to wait for that. Then there was jury selection, and then they took a break for Thanksgiving break because they don't want to start the evidence and then have to stop the evidence. So finally, Thanksgiving is over, and now we are able to get into the Brian Walshe trial. So today was opening statements and day one. There was one witness who was called, played a lot of interviews. And what we're going to do today in today's video is break down and recap everything that happened in trial so you don't have to go and watch the entire 7 hours of trial. We're going to highlight all the most important things that came out in the trial today. Now, it started off actually with some rulings from the judge, and that's very common. A lot of times, definitely before opening statements, if there are some pending motions that are still lingering and the judge didn't make any rulings about that, either the judge will make a ruling about it or the judge will say, I still want to hold off ruling about it. I still want to think about it, but is that going to affect your opening statement? We have to know what the judge's ruling is going to be about certain pieces of evidence if you're going to want to mention them in the opening statement. So the two issues that the judge spoke about before they called the jury in was the following. Number one, there is this mysterious Richard Walker email, an email that came from an account, Richard Walker, and it was a ransom email saying that we have Anna and you have to pay a certain amount of money if you want to ever see Anna again. So this email came into the police. And the defense's position is that this email should not be brought up, should not be allowed in as evidence. You know why? Because despite the investigation that the police did, they were not able to link this email to Brian Walshe, either one of his devices or his Apple ID or anything like that. They were not able to link it to Brian Walshe. So therefore, they argued it's irrelevant. It's not relevant to the charges, not consciousness of guilt. It's not motive. It's nothing. Therefore, it's irrelevant. It should not be allowed in. That was the defense's position. However, the prosecution's position was that this was a tip, this was a lead, and they investigated it. And to show that this is a complete and full investigation, they want to show that even the leads that they turned out with nothing, they still investigated the leads, because we know that the defense always makes the case that the prosecution, the Commonwealth, the state, they did not do a thorough investigation. This is a very common strategy by the defense to say that the investigation, they had blinders on, they focused on one person, things like that we've heard in many, many trials. So to rebut that, the prosecution wants to show that we did a thorough investigation. Even these leads that came in from some random email account, we still investigated it, and still we came to the conclusion that Brian Walshe is the one responsible. So the judge agreed with the Commonwealth, agreed with the prosecution's position that the Richard Walker email is fair game. You are allowed to talk about that in an opening statement, although nobody did. Very interestingly, nobody talked about this Richard Walker email, but still it's most likely going to be coming into evidence at some point during the Commonwealth's case. Another issue, which has everybody wondering about, is the fact that we know that Brian Walshe pled guilty to disinterment of a body and lying to the police. So is the jury going to be apprised of the fact that Brian Walshe pled guilty to those charges? Not whether he's going to come out there and admit that he did certain things, but the fact that he actually pled guilty. So the judge did not make a ruling about this quite yet. This is what everyone's wondering. The judge did not make a ruling about that. She's holding off ruling about this. And therefore, she told the Commonwealth and the defense today, do you need to know my ruling in order to go ahead with your opening statements? Did you have any sort of strategy of mentioning this idea, this concept that Brian Walshe, this fact that Brian Walshe pled guilty to those charges? And the Commonwealth said no, and the defense also said no. So the judge said, fine, I can hold off on ruling on that issue until it actually comes up. So those were the two issues that were brought up before they called the jury in. Then the judge called the jury in and read some preliminary instructions, and then they went to opening statement. So the prosecutor got up and started his opening statement. Now, I always find it interesting when the prosecution opens to see how they're going to say the story. One of the things that you have to do as a trial lawyer is you have to say a story. That's what juries like listening to. People like, not juries, everybody likes listening to stories. So if you're not going to say your case as a story, you're already kind of behind. Okay, this is just a common strategy that all lawyers, all trial lawyers probably know, that you want to say a story. And in fact, one of the first things that I do is usually I identify what we're going to be talking about that day, and then I say, let me tell you a story about what happened in this case. And then you get their attention. And then you start telling them the story. Now, if you're a good storyteller, you have their attention, and you can stress certain parts of the story. It's all about storytelling. That's a lot of the opening and closing arguments. So I'm always interested to see whether it's the prosecution or the defense, how they're going to say their story. Now, I think as a prosecutor, and if it's a civil case as a plaintiff, I think, just from my experience, it's better to say the story from the defendants, for some of you, from their perspective. Okay. And a lot of times I see the prosecution say the story as the investigation, how the investigation got started, how did this all begin in terms of the investigation. And I'm not sure if that's so effective. I always think it's better to start off from the defendant's point of view. So, for example, in Brian Walshe's case, if I was a prosecutor, I think that I would get up and say, Brian Walshe, ladies and gentlemen, who's sitting right here, had a real problem. He had a problem. His problem was he found out that Anna Walshe was having an affair, or that he had a lot of problems with his federal case. He had nothing to lose. You talk about from the defendant's point of view, his perspective of the case and why he eventually did the certain actions that he took, why everything that he did looked suspect. And then, you fill in some of the details that you found out from the investigation. I always think that that's more effective, but a lot of prosecutors I see don't do that. Either they have a different take than me, which is fine. Every lawyer can have different opinions about how you say the story over, but I think it's always more effective to talk about the defendant. You're saying the story from the defendant's point of view and why he made all these odd decisions, these malicious decisions, these decisions with premeditation. You're going for murder one here. So this is what I think is more effective. That's not what the prosecutor did in this case. So he started off the story by talking about Teresa Marchese, who worked at Tishman Spicer, which is where Anna Walshe worked, and started off by saying that she was alerted by Brian Walshe that Anna Walshe was not around. He was looking for Anna Walshe. So this is really where the investigation really started, by Brian Walshe contacting them saying, we don't know where Anna Walshe is. And that's where the whole investigation started. And then they walk you through the investigation, which again, I don't love the approach, but I know a lot of prosecutors do it. And this is how this prosecutor also chose to go about it. Now, again, the facts in this case are very strong, and it's going to be difficult to defend Brian Walshe in this case. But and when you have a lot of the facts on your side, a lot of the evidence on your side, it doesn't really matter ultimately how you say the story. But this is just in terms of stylistically what I like to see. But okay, so the prosecutor started off with the story that Teresa Marchese, who worked at Tishman Spicer, which was in D.C., she was alerted about Brian Walshe, and they were looking for Anna Walshe. And then she eventually spoke to the boss, Jeff, and they went into the conference room. They called Brian Walshe together, and then he said the story that on January 1st, Anna left the house on a work emergency and then just disappeared. He hasn't spoken to her since. So eventually, Teresa drove to Anna's house in D.C. She had a house in D.C. as well. She lived in Massachusetts, but also she lived in Cohasset, and she also lived in Washington, D.C. because she was commuting for work. That's where she was working, Washington, D.C. And she went to her house. Then nothing looked out of the ordinary when she actually went to Anna's house. And Brian was being very helpful at the time, very concerning, and gave the combination to the garage, but the house was locked. They were not able to get into the house, and nothing was out of ordinary. Nothing looked like it was broken into. So it looked pretty safe and secure in the house. So eventually they called the head of security, Dunleavy, and then Dunleavy got on the phone with Brian Walshe, and maybe his demeanor changed when he was talking to Dunleavy. But again, Brian Walshe sticks to the same story. The same story he's going to be sticking to with all the interviews that he did with the police as well, that Anna Walshe just disappeared January 1st. Eventually, he tells Brian Walshe to call the Cohasset police, and in D.C., eventually the police go to Anna Walshe's house in D.C., and they eventually get into the house, but of course, nothing's there. No one's doing that. No one's there. No sign of any sort of struggle or nothing out of the ordinary in the house. So Dunleavy, who is the head of security for Tishman Spicer, contacts the Cohasset police, and that was the first time that she was reported missing. And this was January 4th at noon. Okay, so another part that the prosecution brings out is that Brian Walshe pled guilty to the fraud in this federal case where he was going to be facing jail time. He committed fraud. He sold all these these fake art pieces and whatever he had going on with the federal case, which he was seems to be on some level of house arrest on. Now, Anna Walshe did want to move to DC, and she wanted the family to move to DC. That's where her job was, and it was a very, very high-paying job that she was very happy with. And when she was looking for that house, and when the house that they actually settled on and bought, that was through a gentleman named William Fastow. So you're going to be hearing a lot about Fastow. He's actually going to be taking the stand testifying Thursday of this week. It looks like, according to the prosecution, that's what they think. That's what they project, that they're going to be calling William Fastow, who was the person who eventually had an affair with Anna Walshe. So they became friends. It turned romantic. All right. Now we have Mutlu. Mutlu was a friend of Brian Walshe and Anna Walshe, and he came over for New Year's Eve dinner. So we're going into New Year's Eve. That's when all the disappearance happened the next day. So Mutlu was one of the last people who saw Anna Walshe alive. So they had this New Year's Eve dinner together, and something that Brian Walshe told Mutlu was the fact that he misplaced his phone that day. He wasn't sure where his phone was. He lost his phone. And we're going to see how the prosecution talks about that. So, and then eventually, Mutlu left the home somewhere between 1 and 1:30 in the morning. So let's pull up the first part of the prosecution's opening statement here. We'll show you this clip, which is, again, a very interesting part and a very strong part for the prosecution's case. Thank you very much to Court TV for providing this, the live stream.
Mr. Mutlu left that home on New Year's Day at 1:30 a.m. And there was no mention of a work emergency in Washington, D.C. that would require Anna to fly out or leave the family home at 6 or 7 a.m. that day.
Now, that's a very important fact. So Mutlu left the house, and there was no mention the entire night about this work emergency, where Brian Walshe is going to be reiterating all the time that there was some work emergency that Anna Walshe had to leave January 1st. There was no mention of that at all to Mutlu. So let's get rid of this for a moment. We'll come back to it in a minute. But Brian Walshe told the police that on January 4th, he told the police on January 4th that on January 1st, Anna took a Uber or Lyft, not sure which one, to the airport on this work emergency that she had to immediately leave January 1st. So what's interesting is that the police were able to contact the providers, as we know, the phone providers for Anna Walshe, and listen to what they found with Anna's phone when they tried to pin the location of where her phone was for the next day or two. Let's just move it ahead to right here.
Anna's phone. You're going to get to see the records from that, but essentially the process involves the cell phone carrier, in this case Verizon, sending a signal onto the phone to try and locate it. And the Verizon records will show that the last time that phone that belonged to Anna Walshe interacted with the network was shortly after 3 a.m. on January 2nd. And when it did so, it was in the area of the Walshe home.
So they pinned the phone and through the carrier, and they're able to find that the phone was actually located near the Walshe home on January 2nd at around 3 a.m., which means that either Anna Walshe left her phone and forgot her phone, which who does that, but or that she never took any flight on January 1st. So showing that this was all one big lie of Brian Walshe about his wife disappearing. Okay, so police interviewed Brian Walshe a number of times. And one of the most important things is that Brian Walshe told the police what she was wearing when she left the home that day, January 1st, when she left the home, according to Brian Walshe, at least in the interviews. And you're going to see later about where these items of what she was wearing were located, where they were located. So they started a missing person investigation, and he talks about some of the things that they had to do they had to get different task force involved, and they were proceeding as though this is a missing person investigation. Now, also something interesting that you should know is that Anna Walshe had a $1 million life insurance policy, and she had $200,000 in Fidelity accounts. And then eventually, what happened is that they were able to, Trooper Garino, as you may hear of, Nicholas Garino, you've heard from the Karen Reed case. He is also going to be involved in this case, analyzing the data from the different devices of Brian Walshe, the phone, the iPad, and you're going to be hearing about some of the searches that were done on these phones. You may have heard about it before, but here we get to hear the prosecutor talk about these searches that they discovered on his phones. Let's just pull up there and get to the right place. All right.
Was using Looked up Mr. Fastow.
And again, I'm sorry about the audio, but he's just the prosecutor's just standing a little bit too far away from the microphone there, so we don't get to hear a great audio. But if you put the volume up higher, you should be able to hear clearly.
And that on December 27th, a MacBook that used the Apple ID for Brian Walshe between 8:30 and 9 o'clock researched best strategies to divorce for a man, best state to divorce for a man.
Now remember, this is December 27th, as he said. The prosecutor said that this was December 27th, so this is not even January 1st. This is when he's already researching best strategies for divorce. So he's thinking about divorce now on December 27th, a couple days before Anna Walshe goes missing.
Washington, D.C. divorce laws. On December 29th, Brian Walsh's cell phone was researching buildings that Anna Walshe managed petitioners fire and emergencies she had handled for them in the past. Trooper Guarino will also explain to you the internet history of that MacBook that had Brian Walsh's Apple ID beginning on January 1st.
Now listen closely, because these are the searches for January 1st. So he went through starting December 27th, December 29th, and that was about divorce. And now on January 1st, we start to hear some other very interesting Google searches.
At 4:54 a.m., the MacBook searched best way to dispose of a body, and then went to similar websites for more than an hour. At 6:24 a.m., same day, the same device, searched how long for someone to missing to inherit, how long missing to be dead. Can you throw away body parts? Later on that morning, on January 1st at 9:33 a.m., the MacBook went to search how long does DNA last? And then an article, is it possible to clean DNA off a knife? 30 minutes later, the MacBook researched disposal of a cell phone. At 10:28 a.m., the MacBook researched, I am the user of my wife's credit card, she is missing. And again, on January 1st, at 11:28 a.m., it searched, best way to dispose of body parts after a murder. Trooper Guarino will explain the numerous websites and searches done by the MacBook in the morning and early afternoon on January 1st, and that these websites were about cleaning blood with ammonia, bleach, and hydrogen peroxide. Websites visited included those as whether it is better to throw away crime scene clothes or wash them. One site was entitled, you want to get away with murder? Use a special detergent. This type of activity on the MacBook continued into January 2nd, when it looked up, how long does Lowe's keep security footage? How to saw a body. How to dismember a body.
How to saw a body, how to dismember a body.
Can you be charged with murder without a body? Can you identify a body with broken teeth? The MacBook
Can you identify a body with broken teeth?
also visited websites for apartment complexes in Brockton and Chelsea. One in particular, Chatham West in Brockton. Brian Walshe told investigators that his phone, which was an iPhone 13 mini, had been misplaced and not found until the afternoon of January 2nd, 2023.
Remember, that was the story that Brian Walshe said, that he misplaced his phone. Well, let's see if that's true.
When investigators examined that phone, they learned that it had been connected to a power source. It had been unlocked 4 times by either using the face or the passcode. Investigators will also tell you that the location data from that phone showed that it remained in the Walshe residence until the afternoon of January 2nd, 2023.
So it was unlocked and plugged into a power source. It was unlocked 4 times when he said that it was misplaced. So that was a lie. Now, there was some other things that the prosecutor mentioned during the opening statement. He said that they had another phone of the Walshe children, which they were able to locate, that was at Walgreens, and then the liquor store, then a CVS, then a Lowe's, and a Stop and Shop. And they got the surveillance from Walgreens and CVS and saw that he was purchasing hydrogen peroxide, mops, buckets, hatchets, saws. Then they eventually see somebody go to a dumpster. They see someone go to a dumpster. And then they searched the dumpster, and let's see what they found in the dumpster. Okay, let's get ahead a little bit to where we need to go here. 144.
with Schmidt later that night. On January 9th, the police went to those dumpsters and they took that trash compactor and that dumpster to a facility in Peavey where they searched the contents of both. And they found an Air Mary's watch, blue-gray Hunter boots, a black coat, a COVID vaccination card with Anna Walsh's name on it.
So all the clothing that Brian Walsh described Anna Walsh wearing when she left January 1st, they located in that dumpster, along with a COVID vaccine card back then when people had to carry those around. And it said her name on it, Anna Walsh. What else did they discover?
Rugs, a Tyvek suit, a hammer, shears, snips, a hatchet, and a hacksaw. The police will tell you that these items were packaged and brought back to a laboratory, and they were brought there for examination. And how some of these items were examined for DNA. And the DNA was compared to samples they had from Anna and Brian. And scientists from the state DNA lab will identify DNA of Brian Walsh and Anna Walsh on the Tyvek suit. They will explain that Anna Walsh's DNA was found from items in the dumpster, including drugs, the hatchet, and the hacksaw. Jem Mutlu said goodbye to Anna Walsh about 1 o'clock, 1:30 a.m. on New Year's Day. When he left, she was home, she was alive, she was with her husband. No one has seen her since her husband said she left on January 1st. She has not accessed her finances, her email, her phone has made no calls, and no one has found her body.
So she hasn't had any sort of action after that time when Mutlu saw her. That was the New Year's Eve party. And what do you think happened? Obviously, she was murdered by Brian Walsh, and that is why the prosecution is going to be asking them, the jury, to come back with a guilty verdict. So what are you going to do as the defense? I mean, they got such strong evidence. You heard about those Google searches. So how exactly are they going to come up with the defense for this? Now, remember, he also pled guilty to disinterment. So he's pleading guilty to using all those tools, apparently, and dismembering his wife. So what type of defense are you going to use? So his defense attorney got up there and he said, well, you have to understand, Brian Walsh did lie to the police. He lied to the police. He went to Home Depot. He went to the Lowe's. He bought those tools. He made those searches. And the reason that he made those searches is because he wrestled with the fact that Anna was dead. Now, the way that he says the story, and I'm going to let him speak because this is the defense's case right here. So we're going to hear how Mr. Tipton lays out the defense's case right here. What really happened according to the defense that night. Now, him also, he's standing really far away from the microphone, so nothing I can do about it, but listen closely.
That he looked at his email. You'll hear evidence that he then returned to the bedroom.
Now, he's talking about after Mutlu left. So he's saying Mutlu left, and Anna Walsh and Brian Walsh continued to celebrate. They eventually went upstairs, and then Brian Walsh came downstairs, checked an email, and now listen to the rest of the story.
Intending nothing more than to crawl into bed with Anna Walsh, the woman he loved. When he entered the bedroom and began to get into the bed, he said.
So he went downstairs first. I missed this part. He went downstairs to clean up the kitchen. He went back upstairs, and this is what happened.
Something was wrong. You will hear evidence that it made no sense to him. But he nudged Anna, his wife. She didn't respond. He nudged her again, a little harder. She didn't respond. He nudged her now in a frantic and panic reaction to where she actually rolled off the bed. You'll hear evidence that now he is panicking and he doesn't understand what has happened and what is happening. It didn't make any sense to him. It didn't make sense that somebody that he had just been with and enjoyed New Year's Eve into New Year's Day would suddenly be dead. Not easy. You will hear evidence in this case of sudden, unexplained death. You will hear evidence that it is rape. You will hear evidence that it happens in young people and old. You will hear evidence it happens in male and female. You will hear evidence it happens during the day and during the night, that it happens. Trained athletes. You will hear evidence that it can be the result of both mechanical and or electrical problems within the body. You will hear evidence that it might be cardiovascular, pulmonary, neurological, or other reasons. You will hear evidence that it occurs in people who have never manifested a symptom that something might be wrong. And in fact, you will hear evidence that sometimes the first manifestation that something is or was wrong with someone is the sudden, unexplained.
So that's the defense. Sudden, unexplained death. Brian Walshe had nothing to do with this. He loved his wife. They had a great New Year's Eve together. He went down to clean the kitchen. He comes back upstairs and she is just dead. He nudges her so hard, he's panicking. He even nudges her off the bed. But that's what happened. She just died. Unexpectedly, no symptoms, no nothing. That's their case. And then what happened is, obviously, is that he panicked. According to the defense, he panicked. That's why he made these searches. That's why he acted the way that he did, disinterred her. And yeah. So he also talks about how they loved each other and their only stress in the marriage was because of the pending federal case where he was facing prison time, where it's very likely he was going to end up in prison. And he had a lot of restitution to pay, but the finances were not a problem. And he also explained that Brian Walshe, right, was very supportive of Anna Walshe. Anna Walshe had this job that she got, was a great job, paid her a lot of money, north of $300,000, which anyone would agree was a great job. And she would go to D.C. to work, and he was the one who was taking care of all the kids. Someone's got to take care of the kids, and that's what Brian Walshe was doing. And yeah, and then he talks about there was an affair in this case. There is an affair in this case. And it wasn't by Brian Walshe. Brian Walshe wasn't the one having the affair. Anna Walshe was having the affair, but said to the jury that you should understand that affair does not make you a bad person, does not make you a bad mother. And he says that Anna Walshe tried her best to hide the affair from everybody. She didn't even tell her close friends or close confidants, would not tell them about this affair. She didn't want anyone to find out about this affair. And she even told this William Fastow, that she would be devastated if Brian Walshe found out about the affair. Now, Brian Walshe did find out that he knew that she had a crush on him. And the way that Mr. Tipton explained this is that, Anna Walshe was an attractive young woman, and she would tell Brian Walshe all the time, a certain man looked at me a certain way, and I think he likes me, or maybe I think he's also cute. But he trusted her. He said, okay, you're an attractive young woman. I understand that. But it was not uncommon for her to talk about the people that she had a crush on, and therefore Fastow was just one of them. And this was just a regular another day in Brian Walsh's life. This would not be a motive for Brian Walshe to go and murder his wife, because he knew about all about these crushes that people had on her all the time. And in fact, it even upsetted Anna Walshe at some point, because she told her good friend, Melissa Kirby, that she wishes that Brian would sometimes get jealous. He just didn't get jealous. He just trusted her. He didn't get jealous of her at all. Didn't get jealous of anybody who was flirting with her or having a crush on her, or her having a crush on him, because he just trusted her implicitly. There was no financial issue either, he explains, because the Commonwealth wanted to say that this may be about money. The motive might be about the money, the insurance policy. No, there's no financial issue at all. In fact, her job paid over $300,000 a year. And they own a townhouse there together for over $1 million. Now, if Brian Walshe knew about the affair and was thinking, hey, Anna Walshe is going to go packing with a $300,000 job and her house, and again, I don't know how that house was written in both of their names or whatnot, but the defense is making the case that Brian Walshe had no idea about this affair. Now, there's going to be some text messages we're going to hear about later. And if you want to hear about those, William Fastow is going to be testifying in this case. It seems like Thursday. And that's probably when you're going to be hearing about all these text messages. And you can decipher for yourself whether there was an affair or this was just a crush. Seems like it was clear from the text messages that there was an affair. But I believe that the defense's position here is going to be that Brian Walshe did not know about those text messages, even though at some point I think there's going to be some evidence that he had access to devices which would show her text messages. So this knowledge of whether Brian Walshe knew that Anna was having an affair is going to be a very big part of this case. If he knew and he was thinking that, look, he's about to go to prison, she's going to go with the kids with this new guy Fastow, move to DC, have her cushy job, and he's going to be stuck with this restitution. Yeah, it can start making a lot more sense why he would want to do this. But the defense's case is going to be that he knew nothing about this. So, and he also said that they owned whole life insurance policies on each of the kids, which $1 million each. And you're able, when you have a whole life insurance policy, you can borrow against that if you'd like. And Brian Walsh's mother used to give them money. She would actually pay their rent. They owned investment properties in Massachusetts. So money here was not an issue. That's what the defense is trying to make the case here. There is no issue with money. Now, in fact, Anna Walshe also told her boyfriend, I guess, Fastow, that she liked Brian Walshe and that she wants people to see Brian Walshe, see the Brian Walshe that she knows, that she was talking in very glowing terms of Brian Walshe. She really liked him. Anna Walshe described Brian Walshe as her best friend. And there were text messages between Brian Walshe and Anna Walshe a couple days before January 1st, showing that they were very happy with each other, very in love, making jokes to each other, talking about these listings of properties that they owned together, searching for more investment properties. And in fact, one of the investment properties sold, and they were discussing what to do with the proceeds of that sale. At some point, Anna Walshe was talking that she was not feeling well on around, I think it was December 26th, and they were joking about that. And at some point, she said something about buying her a Porsche, and then he would start sending her listings about different Porsches that he was looking into, supposedly, to buying her. Mutlu that night, going back to the New Year's Eve, when Mutlu came over, he saw no problems. The atmosphere was very jovial and loving. So it was a very nice, wonderful atmosphere. You couldn't tell that there was anything wrong at all with the relationship. And she even signed the champagne box that they were drinking. They're drinking some champagne and wine. And Anna Walshe signed this champagne box. Let's make 2023 the best one yet. And then she signed courage, love, perseverance, compassion, joy, signed with love, Anna. Now, very interesting about this divorce search. So something that he talks about with the divorce search, do you think that he was getting ready to get divorced? And that may be why he was panicking and maybe realized that I have to knock her off. Well, listen to the excuse here about the divorce search. So this is, let me just pull it up there. Here we go.
And Brian, it's 3 beautiful boys. They had talked about the problem of the federal case. It was stressful. When you heard in the Commonwealth's open the reference to a divorce search, please understand that the other evidence will be that singular search occurred between conversations between Anna and Brian about the sale of their property. You'll see that search occurred about 8:30 on 12/27. And why is that important? The evidence will show that the only time Anna Walshe talked about divorce with William Fastow, she talked about it in terms of Brian and I attempting to preserve the family assets. Why is that important? Because yes, there was $400,000 of restitution that was going to come due. And yes, Brian may have had to go to prison for some time. And what did that mean? It meant that there was going to have to be arrangements, not just to pay the money, which wasn't going to be a problem, but the boys had to move up to DC because Brian could no longer take care of them. And there would be all that added expense. And they went so far as to talk to Robin Howe, their nanny, their babysitter, and asked her if she would consider moving up. So there were expenses. So when you talk about preserving the family assets, you have to decide, how is it that I make sure? How is it, as Brian Walshe will tell you, how is it?
Now, did you hear that? As Brian Walshe will tell you. And he was very deliberate to say that. The reason why he's being deliberate to say that is because he's telling the jury right now that Brian Walshe is going to take the stand in this case. Not something that you always see from the opening statement, at least, that the defense is letting the jury know that I'm going to be calling Brian Walshe. And now if something happens during the case that he's not called now, even though the judge is going to give an instruction that, if he chooses not to take the stand, there's going to be an instruction that they can't use that against him and he has a Fifth Amendment right, all that good stuff, right? But the jury hears this. They hear it from, he's going to take the stand. Now he's not going to take the stand. What changed? What happened? They're going to be thinking some of this, even though they shouldn't be. But he's saying very clearly right now that Brian Walshe is going to take the stand. And it was deliberate. This wasn't just a slip.
That I make sure that my wife and my 3 sons are financially secure if I have to go to prison for a day, for a week, for a month, or for years. That's what they were talking about. And in all of the other digital data.
So this is what their case is. The reason why they're talking about divorce is because they wanted to figure out a way to preserve the family assets. If Brian Walshe is going to prison, what's going to be with the kids? How are we going to figure out the assets? If we're married, apparently that's going to make more of a trouble with the family assets. So that's why they were talking about divorce, not because they fell out of love. They're talking about divorce just simply practically speaking. What are we going to do with all our assets if you're in prison and this and that? It might make things more difficult. Exactly how he doesn't really explain, but that's why they were talking about divorce. On 12/27, which is the same day that she's going to be talking about with Fastow, her boyfriend, or person who's having an affair with, also about divorce, because it's in the context of preserving the family assets. That's their defense for the divorce searches. Now, he doesn't talk about the other searches, but I think it's clear by implication that the other searches he believes was because he was panicking. And we're going to hear that shortly right now.
He went back down to the kitchen about an hour later to clean it up. And then the impossible, the unimaginable happened. It didn't make sense to Brian Walshe. It was confusing. He never thought anybody would believe that Anna Walshe was alive one minute and dead the next. And all he could think about were those 3 boys. What would happen to their 3 boys now that Anna is no longer here? What will happen if they think he did something bad to Anna? Where will those 3 boys go? And so, he told the story. He told lies.
You told lies.
He tried to hide so he could hang on to those boys. Brian Walshe never killed him. Brian Walshe never thought about killing him. He would never. Brian Walshe is not good.
So, I know you couldn't hear those last few words, but that was the excuse there, that Brian Walshe did not kill Anna Walshe. It was just that he didn't think that anyone was going to believe that 1 second Anna Walshe was alive and the next second she died for some sudden unexplained reasons, and that he had nothing to do with it. Now, again, it's very, very, you got to say something. You got to argue something. Is it the greatest defense? No. Why? Because why not? Why would somebody believe that you had anything to do with it? If they do an autopsy and they see that there's no poison in her system, there's no bruising, there's no choke holds, why would they assume that you had anything to do with it? Like, so the only explanation, perhaps, that you can try to argue for the defense is that, well, he panicked. He panicked. He just assumed that they're going to pin it on him, even though there'd be no evidence linking him to her. This would just be sudden, unexplained death. There's nothing really to explain, a heart attack or whatever it was that caused her to die. An aneurysm, whatever it is that caused her to die, according to the defense. Why would he think that he's implicated in any way if he didn't do anything wrong? But you got to argue something, and this is what Tipton's doing. He's doing the best that he can with the facts that he has. So he's going to make that case, and that is the opening statements from both the prosecution and the defense. So very quickly, we had Harrison Schmidt, who is a Cohasset police sergeant, and he interviewed Brian Walshe a number of times. And there's a lot of this interview, which, again, reiterating a lot of the same facts about what Brian Walsh's story is, which at this point, both sides agree is a bunch of baloney. It was a bunch of nonsense. They both agreed that it was a lie. So you don't have to really go through, again, it's the whole story that she went missing, and a lot of information about, Anna Walshe and Brian Walshe, and text messages that they had with each other, and pictures that they sent to each other, and, all the stories leading up to what happened that day and where they were and what parties they went to and Thanksgiving, and then she was in Siberia, whatever, Serbia. I'm sorry. So, just some different basic facts, some true, some are not. But at this point, the interviews are not that interesting anymore because they're both agreeing that they lied about the underlying story here. Now, what was interesting also, which was an issue before this trial, was that he had a child who seemed to have given a report to the police that Anna Walshe left that morning and told him goodbye. This is a kid talking, that Anna Walshe got up at 6 o'clock in the morning or something and said goodbye to the kid, said that I love you. And the kid actually told this over to the police. So we'll see if that comes up in the trial. But he did say that in one of the interviews. He also said that the only problem they had in marriage was not spending enough time together, nothing about the federal case that he was facing. She was better on staying on top of the bills. She has a bad memory, so they walk through the home. There's a hole in the ceiling, which was a disputed fact here. I mean, whether this is going to come in or not, there's an objection by the defense whether that can come in. But there's a hole in the ceiling, which I guess we'll see the significance of as the trial continues. And then he looked at this Volvo. Looked at the Volvo in the driveway of the Walshe residence. And there's a plastic sheet that was folded in the trunk with some maple seedling inside there. And okay, he's also describing a lot of the investigation for the missing person investigation. Looked at the attic, looked at the basement, looked in the shed in the backyard. There's a pool there. They looked in the pool. They also looked in the Volvo, and they found a receipt. I think it was a Lowe's receipt in the Volvo, as well as another cell phone. And this cell phone was Brian Walshe's oldest son's cell phone. So there was this Lowe's receipt, and then there was a January 6th press conference by the chief. And yeah, they spoke to Mutlu, and that was essentially what happened in day one. So tomorrow, day 2, we are going to be continuing with our coverage here. We did live stream the trial today. We're going to be live streaming the trial tomorrow, God willing. So we're going to start 9:30 tomorrow morning with the day 2 of Brian Walshe's case. We're going to have about another 40 minutes of the interviews with Brian Walshe, and then we're going to be moving on to some other witnesses, including one of your favorite troopers, Nicholas Garino, who is going to be testifying about the Google searches and the things that we spoke about already in the opening statements and what other data that he found on the devices of Brian Walshe. That's going to be tomorrow. And then again, we're going to probably get to William Fastow Thursday of this week. So join us tomorrow for the continued live stream of this trial, 9:30 right here. And we'll be watching it together. So if you haven't yet, please subscribe, like, and we will see you next time.